In the dim hush of a forgotten century, where candlelight danced upon stone walls and the scent of burning tallow lingered in narrow corridors, there existed a world both intimate and distant, the medieval world. A world where belief walked hand in hand with mystery, where whispers carried the weight of truth, and where the unseen governed the hearts of men and women alike. Tonight, as you drift slowly toward sleep, let us step softly into that time, into the quiet chambers of women who once waited for signs far subtler than words. For before science, before laboratories and glass tubes, before the modern certainty of a small blue line, there were myths. Gentle, secret myths that lived in the hearts of medieval women. Imagine the glow of a single candle, its flame trembling slightly as a cool breeze slips through the cracks of an old wooden window. A woman sits alone beside it, her hands resting upon her lap, the coarse linen of her dress folding softly over her knees. Her eyes, half closed, trace the flicker of light as if it holds an answer. She listens, not for sound, but for the silent language of her own body. Days have passed since her last bleeding. Her body feels heavier, quieter. The village? Midwife had told her once that if her urine turned the color of sunrise when left overnight, it meant a child might be growing within. Others said that if she felt a subtle flutter beneath her ribs before the second moon, it was the soul of her unborn whispering to her heart. Such were the worlds of belief, fragile, tender, but deeply human. In medieval Europe, women lived surrounded by symbols. To them, nature was not separate from the body. It was the body. The hum of bees meant fertility. The opening of blossoms foretold birth. A woman's health was tied to the moon, her emotions to the tides, and her womb to the divine rhythm of creation itself. And so, when a woman suspected she might be carrying life, she did not run to a physician. There were none she could trust, and fewer who would listen. Instead, she turned to old knowledge, whispered through generations of midwives, and herbal women passed down like sacred songs sung in low tones beside a hearth. They called them wise women, though others, with fear in their hearts, called them witches. These women kept the knowledge of herbs and stars, of blood and bone, of life and loss. They were both feared and revered, depending on whether their remedies healed or their prophecies came true. If you listen closely now, beneath the gentle hum of the night, you can almost hear their voices, soft, low, ancient, telling the stories of how they once read the body's signs. One method was known as the barley and wheat test. A woman would urinate on seeds of barley and wheat over several days. If the grain sprouted, it was believed she was pregnant. If not, the womb was empty. What's surprising is that centuries later, scientists found there was a strange grain of truth to this myth. Female hormones in urine can cause certain seeds to germinate faster. But for those women, this was no science. It was faith, a quiet trust in nature's signs. They watched the seeds as they might watch the stars, waiting for destiny to bloom in silence. There was also the garlic test. It was said that if a clove of garlic, placed gently overnight in a woman's womb, could be smelled on her breath the next morning, she was not pregnant, for that meant her passages were open. But if the scent could not travel through her, then a child had already begun to close the sacred doorway of life. Strange, perhaps even disturbing to our modern minds, yet to them it was sacred ritual, not mockery, not absurdity, but reverence for the mystery of creation itself. Imagine, again, the soft glow of dawn filtering through a small window, falling across a wooden table. On it lies a simple bowl filled with pale yellow water, her morning urine, still warm, waiting beside a handful of seeds. A cat curls by the fire, its tail flicking lazily. The woman's husband is already in the fields. She is alone with her thoughts and with her hopes. She leans closer, whispering a prayer under her breath. A prayer not to a god of science, but to a goddess of fertility, perhaps Saint Anne or the Virgin Mary herself. To her, faith is not a matter of choice. It is her only bridge to understanding. The world outside is cruelly uncertain. Childbirth is dangerous. Half the women she knows have lost children before their first cry. Every pregnancy is both a miracle and a risk. And so she prays not only for life, but for survival, hers and the life within. Outside, the church bell tolls. Its sound rolls through the morning mist like a wave of solemn comfort. She crosses herself gently, whispering again, "If it is God's will, let it be done." But belief in the medieval world was never just divine. It was also deeply earthly. For many, the female body was seen as a vessel of mystery, ruled by humors, influenced by stars, and balanced between purity and sin. A woman's womb, they believed, could wander within her, drifting upward toward the heart or downward toward the feet, causing madness or melancholy. So when a woman's body changed, when her mood softened or her appetite shifted, she was watched carefully, sometimes with tenderness, sometimes with suspicion. Midwives would observe her eyes. Were they bright or clouded? They would listen to her voice. Did it tremble? They would even taste her urine, believing the flavor could reveal whether it was carrying the sweetness of new life. Such was the intimacy of knowledge in that time, raw, close, unflinching. Now take a slow breath. Let the image settle in your mind. The quiet village, the smell of bread baking, the slow rhythm of horses' hooves outside. The sound of a woman humming softly as she waits for the seeds to sprout. Each sound folds into the next, blending into a lullaby of the past. There were no hospitals, no doctors in white coats, only the simple trust that life would reveal itself through signs, through dreams, through the swelling of the belly, through whispers in the night. And sometimes, even the smallest change, a missed moon, a strange craving, a sudden warmth in the chest, was enough to fill her world with both fear and wonder. Historians now look back and smile at these methods. The barley test, the garlic test, the color test, but within them lies something profound. The earliest attempts of humankind to interpret the secret language of the body. Each myth, each ritual was a bridge between ignorance and discovery, between the known and the unknowable, between faith and science. And so, as the candlelight flickers lower and your eyes begin to grow heavy, imagine her once more, that nameless woman of long ago, sitting beside the fire, holding her breath as she watches the barley seeds, hoping that tomorrow a sprout will rise from the earth and confirm what her heart already knows. She does not know it, but her small act, her simple test, will echo through centuries. From the whispers of her midwife to the ink of scholars, from the dusty manuscripts of monks to the bright laboratories of the modern age. In her silence, she becomes part of a story, the story of how humanity learned to listen to the quiet signals of life. The room fades slowly to darkness. The fire sighs its final breath. Outside, the night deepens into stillness. And somewhere, in the heart of that stillness, a seed begins to grow. Outside, the night deepens, and the village rests beneath a silver wash of moonlight. The air is cooler now, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth, mingled with the lingering warmth of hearth fires. The world seems to pause, as if holding its breath along with the women who live within it, waiting, listening for the faintest signs of life and change. Within the small, dimly lit rooms, where wooden beams creak softly and the wind whispers through the gaps in the walls, the quiet heartbeat of medieval understanding continues its delicate rhythm. A woman stirs slightly upon a straw-stuffed mattress. She has slept lightly, dreams tinged with the gentle weight of anticipation. Her body, attentive and mysterious even to her own awareness, signals subtleties she can barely interpret. The midwife had instructed her long ago to notice the smallest shifts, a warmth in her lower abdomen, a flutter beneath her ribs, or a sudden sensitivity to smells once familiar. Every whisper from her body is a word in a language that only she, or the women before her, can decipher. In those days, the womb was considered a living entity of its own, capable of moving through the body, carrying moods, desires, and even illnesses along with it. Physicians and learned men called this the wandering womb, a concept that shaped how society interpreted the health and behavior of women. They believed that if the womb rose toward the chest, it could cause anxiety, faintness, or a restless spirit. If it descended toward the hips or legs, melancholy or lethargy might follow. It was a humoral world. Black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm, all thought to influence not only physical health but emotional state and, most importantly, fertility. Yet, within the quiet of her chamber, the woman neither thinks of theory nor doctrine. She simply listens. She breathes, paying careful attention to every small shift of sensation, every pulse of life within her. She has learned, through whispered stories of her mother and grandmother, and the subtle guidance of the village midwife, that the body itself speaks. Sometimes its language is delicate as the flutter of a bird's wing, sometimes as insistent as the rumble of distant thunder. Her morning routine is as much ritual as necessity. She washes her hands in cool water drawn from a nearby well, the sensation grounding her. She examines the bowl of barley and wheat seeds from the previous night. The tiny grains, now slightly swollen, hint at what she hopes to see. Patience, she has been told, is as much a part of fertility as the body itself. Across the village, other women engage in similarly quiet rites. Some place garlic cloves beneath their pillows. Some anoint themselves with mixtures of rosemary, sage, and myrrh. Others carry small tokens, charms blessed in the chapel, praying that divine favor will guide the growth of new life. These practices are intertwined with faith and folklore, inseparable from the rhythms of daily existence. A sneeze might be read as a portent, a dream of running water as an omen of conception. The midwife, a figure of both awe and caution, moves softly among the villagers. She carries knowledge of herbs that can soothe, stimulate, or strengthen the body. She knows the significance of the phases of the moon, of tides, of the alignment of certain stars. She interprets not just the physical signs, but the spiritual and emotional cues that surround each woman, reading subtle indications as one might read a story in a scroll of parchment. Her tools are simple: a small satchel of herbs, a length of linen cloth, a cup for observing urine, and the quiet authority of her experience. Even the humblest households are suffused with these beliefs. In the kitchen, a pot simmers over the fire, its aroma weaving through the rooms and into the soft spaces of rest. Bread is kneaded, herbs are dried, and water is drawn, all acts carrying an undercurrent of vigilance, of attention to the sacred cycles of life. Life and death, conception and miscarriage, hope and despair, all are woven into these daily actions, ordinary and yet extraordinary, silent yet profoundly resonant. As the day stretches onward, the woman notices a subtle shift. Perhaps it is the warmth of her belly, perhaps a fleeting taste on her tongue, perhaps a faint thrum within her chest. Whatever it is, she acknowledges it not with fear, but with careful attention. She knows that the signs can be contradictory, that hope must be tempered with caution. But she also knows that life often reveals itself in whispers rather than proclamations. The belief systems of the time, while often strange to modernize, are deeply rooted in observation and intuition. Midwives and women alike had honed a kind of empirical understanding of the body, derived from countless cycles of birth and loss, from generations of attentive care. They did not know hormones or chromosomes, yet they understood the rhythms of fertility, the timing of conception, and the subtle indicators of pregnancy in ways that modern science can only trace in retrospect. Some women recorded their observations in the quiet of the night. A line of dates in a worn journal, a note about the color of their urine, the appearance of their breasts, the presence of unusual dreams, all compiled in secret, for fear of ridicule or misunderstanding, yet forming an intricate map of knowledge that was passed down orally, often from mother to daughter or midwife to apprentice. In the halls of the village, the interplay of superstition and pragmatism shaped daily life. Women who had conceived were watched carefully, both to ensure their safety and to understand the markers that had led to the pregnancy. The community's understanding of fertility was communal as well as personal. No woman experienced it entirely alone. Stories were shared quietly over the fire, in fields and kitchens, in hushed tones that floated through corridors of stone and timber. These whispers were the connective tissue of collective knowledge, carrying the myths, the rituals, and the insights of countless women before her. The rituals themselves could be elaborate or simple, practical or symbolic. A woman might place certain seeds under her pillow, believing that their growth in soil reflected the potential growth within her womb. She might drink infusions of herbs thought to balance her humors, or bathe in water blessed by the local priest. Each act, each gesture carries meaning, a dialogue between body, mind, and spirit that transcends the scientific language of later centuries. The night deepens further. Shadows gather along the walls, stretching like silent witnesses to the patient waiting. She lies down again, her head cushioned by a bundle of rough linen. Her thoughts drift slowly, mingling with memory and hope. She recalls her mother's advice, her grandmother's gentle warning, the midwife's careful instructions. Every detail is remembered, every story retold silently within her own mind. Time itself seems to bend. Hours stretch and compress. The turning of the moon marks intervals of waiting and observation. She moves through these cycles with an awareness that is both acute and subtle. To modern eyes, it may appear as anxiety or superstition, yet to her, it is a form of knowledge, a quiet attentiveness to the rhythms of life, a patient dialogue with the unseen. As dawn approaches, a soft light filters through the cracks of the shutters. She rises gently, mindful not to disturb the fragile equilibrium of her body. She checks the seeds again, observing with careful eyes. Perhaps a sprout has emerged. Perhaps not. Either way, the ritual has served its purpose. It has given her a sense of connection, a way to translate the silent messages of her body into meaning. In these moments, one understands the profound intimacy of medieval women's experience. Knowledge was not abstract or impersonal. It was embodied, lived, and felt. It flowed through touch, observation, and the gentle practice of attentiveness. It was slow, deliberate, and intertwined with every aspect of daily life, a knowledge that was patient, tender, and quietly powerful. Her breathing slows as she sits beside the window, the first light of morning spilling across the floor. She allows herself a moment of reflection, of quiet gratitude. Perhaps she is pregnant, perhaps she is not. The certainty is less important than the act of listening, of attending, of participating in the subtle dialogue that life itself has set in motion. And so, the world continues its rhythm. The midwife moves from house to house, her presence a steady current of guidance. The women of the village maintain their rituals, silently observing, gently interpreting, quietly understanding. Each heartbeat, each whisper of the body, each flicker of hope becomes part of a tapestry of knowledge that is as old as the hills, as enduring as the stones beneath their feet, and as gentle as the first light of day. Time passes, and the village awakens fully. Life resumes its ordinary patterns. Bread is baked, animals are tended, water is drawn, and the cycles of daily labor continue. Yet beneath this surface, the quiet intelligence of women's observation persists. Each gesture, each small action, carries the weight of wisdom accumulated over generations. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet powerful beyond measure. And now, as the morning settles softly upon the village, the woman knows that she has participated in something ancient and enduring. She has listened to her body, she has honored its signals, and she has engaged in a practice that connects her with countless generations of women before her. In this act, there is a quiet dignity, a profound intimacy, and a whispering of myths that carry the deepest truths of human experience. As the first golden light of morning filtered gently through the cracks in the wooden shutters, the village slowly awakened to its daily rhythm. The women who had spent the long night listening to the subtle messages of their bodies rose quietly to meet the day, carrying with them the weight of anticipation, hope, and the fragile certainty of ancient knowledge. Each step upon the cold stone floors was careful, measured, as if the slightest misstep could disturb the delicate balance of life itself. Beyond the windows, the air shimmered with mist, softening the edges of the village and giving the rising sun a mystical, almost ethereal glow. Smoke curled upward from chimneys, blending with the morning fog, and the faint bleating of goats and lowing of cattle punctuated the quiet. Within their humble homes, the women tended to hearth and home, to children and kin, yet each carried an invisible burden, the quiet, personal vigilance of a body that could harbor life or remain empty. It was in this quiet attentiveness that medieval women discovered a form of profound intelligence. Without the tools of modern science, they had developed intricate methods of observation, a language of signs and symptoms that spoke of conception, gestation, and the subtle shifts that accompanied them. The practice was not merely ritual. It was empirical in the most intimate sense. A twitch of the abdomen, a change in appetite, a sudden preference for certain foods. Each was noted, pondered, and woven into the tapestry of understanding that had been handed down across generations. Some signs were purely sensory. The soft swelling of the breasts, tender to the touch, the gentle flutter deep within the abdomen that could barely be felt, the subtle darkening of the areolas. These were signals that modern science would later understand in terms of hormones and physiological change. Yet to the women of that time, these were messages from the body, interpreted through intuition, experience, and a long lineage of ancestral knowledge. In certain households, herbs were employed as companions in this silent dialogue. Infusions of sage, rue, or parsley might be prepared and consumed, not to alter the outcome, but to harmonize the body with its natural cycles. Some women wore small pouches of dried plants close to their skin, believing that their essences could communicate directly with the womb. Others drew on the knowledge of the stars, noting the moon's phases and the alignment of particular constellations. Fertility was not merely a biological event. It was a cosmic one, intertwined with heaven, earth, and the mysteries of the unseen. The midwife, revered and often feared, was central to this network of understanding. Her presence was quiet yet commanding, her knowledge drawn from countless cycles of birth, countless stories of life emerging and retreating from the world. She observed not only the body, but the spirit, listening to the tone of a woman's voice, the cadence of her breath, and the subtle trembling of her hands. These observations, combined with careful record-keeping in memory and whispered notes, allowed her to guide and counsel with remarkable accuracy, bridging the gap between superstition and insight. In some villages, women would test for pregnancy in ways that appear unusual to modern eyes, yet carried a logic born of observation. Barley and wheat tests, performed over several nights, were not merely superstition. They were an attempt to externalize the internal signals of the body into tangible evidence. The sprouting of seeds, the absence of growth, were read as messages. And though not infallible, they represented an early form of experimental thinking, a dialogue with nature conducted in the silence of the hearth-lit room. Even the act of dreaming was considered a form of intelligence. Women were encouraged to recall their dreams upon waking, for it was believed that these nocturnal visions might carry warnings, confirmations, or subtle insights into the presence of new life within the womb. Dreams of running water, of swaying trees, of birdsong at the break of day were interpreted as omens, each layered with meaning that required skill and attentiveness to understand. Beyond the rituals and physical signs, the social and communal aspect of observation was profound. Women shared stories quietly, passing down not only the techniques of prediction, but the emotional framework to navigate anticipation, fear, and hope. A young woman learning from her mother, or an apprentice midwife from her mentor, became part of a continuum of knowledge that transcended written text. Every shared secret, every whispered method, was a thread in a fabric that linked generations across time and space. The environment itself contributed to understanding. Sunlight through small windows revealed subtle changes in the color of the skin. The air's humidity affected how herbs were prepared. Even the direction of the wind, believed to carry omens, was noted with care. In this world, there was no separation between the body, nature, and the divine. All existed as a unified system, a delicate network of observation, intuition, and reverence. And yet, despite the intricate knowledge and attentiveness, there remained uncertainty. Pregnancy was a miracle, a mystery, and a risk. The death of infants, stillbirths, and miscarriages were frequent, reminders of the fragility of life. These tragedies reinforced the importance of careful observation, of patience, and of rituals designed to nurture hope while acknowledging the limits of human control. In the quiet of their homes, women learned to balance fear and expectation, to cultivate resilience through the smallest, most attentive acts of care. As the day progressed, the woman revisits her tests. She observes the grains of barley and wheat once more, noting subtle differences, changes in texture, or the faintest signs of germination. She may whisper a prayer or simply nod to herself, acknowledging the possibility of life stirring within. This ritual, repeated and refined over countless nights, becomes both a practice of faith and a practice of mindfulness, a bridge between the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown. Across the village, similar practices unfold. Women bend over bowls, place their hands over subtly swelling abdomens, and exchange quiet confidences with those they trust. They interpret not only physical signs, but emotional ones, the rising and falling of spirits, sudden bursts of energy or lethargy, the gentle alignment of desire and instinct. Every gesture, every observation is integrated into a larger framework of understanding that is at once deeply personal and collectively reinforced. In the quiet hours before the sun reaches its zenith, a sense of sacred attentiveness pervades. Women move deliberately, softly, as if their own movements might disturb the fragile balance of unseen forces. Even mundane tasks, drawing water, tending the hearth, feeding children, are performed with a heightened awareness, a recognition that life, in its most intimate forms, demands care and mindfulness. It is within this framework of patience, observation, and subtle interpretation that the medieval understanding of pregnancy existed. The signs were rarely loud or dramatic. They were whispers, faint signals that required concentration and experience to discern. The wisdom of generations, encoded in gestures, rituals, and quiet attentiveness, became the medium through which life was both anticipated and celebrated. As afternoon light softens into the golden hue of evening, the woman reflects quietly upon the day. She acknowledges the patience she has exercised, the observations she has recorded, and the subtle changes her body has revealed. In this quiet reflection, there is a profound intimacy, a communion with her own body, with the women who have come before her, and with the mysterious processes that govern creation itself. Though modern knowledge might render these rituals quaint, they embody a deeply human truth, that understanding the body, life and fertility requires attentiveness, reflection, and a willingness to listen. These women were early observers of human biology in the most profound sense, combining empirical attention with faith, intuition, and social wisdom in a way that resonates even today. And so, as night falls once more over the village, the woman lies down to rest. Her body, attuned to subtle rhythms, continues its quiet dialogue, and her mind drifts gently through memories, stories, and the soft anticipation of life that may be taking root within her. The candle on her windowsill flickers its final light, casting elongated shadows across the room. She breathes slowly, evenly, and allows herself to drift towards sleep, carrying with her the intimate, whispered knowledge of generations. A quiet understanding that life, in all its fragility and wonder, continues to unfold, even in the silence of night. And as the moon rises fully above the village, bathing the rooftops in silver light, the rhythms of anticipation, observation, and quiet faith persist, carried not by instruments or texts, but by the gentle, patient awareness of those who listened carefully, who attended with devotion, and who understood, in ways both mystical and profoundly real, the silent whispers of life itself. As the soft silver of moonlight settled over the rooftops of the village, washing the cobbled streets and thatched roofs in an ethereal glow, The night seemed to breathe slowly, deliberately, as if the world itself paused to honor the quiet rituals of the women within it. The air was cool, tinged with the faint aroma of damp earth and smoldering embers from hearths that had not yet fully extinguished. The village lay mostly silent, except for the occasional low bleat of a goat or the rustle of a cat moving stealthily across a roof tile. And in the stillness, the women who had spent the day observing, tending and waiting, now allowed themselves a pause, a moment in which the body and mind were equally attuned to the invisible threads that tied their lives together. One woman, seated near the small window of her chamber, gazed outward as the moon rose higher, illuminating the gentle curve of her courtyard and the subtle movements of night animals. Her hands rested lightly upon her abdomen, not pressing, not probing, but attuned, listening. She was acutely aware of every minor sensation, the gentle flutter of muscles, a slight warmth, the ebb and flow of inner rhythm. And she knew that each was a signal, a word in a language spoken only by the body and by those who had learned to listen carefully over generations. Medieval understanding of fertility extended far beyond the physical body. Religion and superstition were entwined with physiology, creating a framework in which divine will, cosmic alignment, and empirical observation existed side by side. Women often sought guidance from saints, invoking their protection and intervention. Saint Anne, the patroness of mothers and expectant women, was a frequent figure of devotion. Pilgrimages to her shrines, small offerings of candles, and whispered prayers in the dim corners of chapels were part of the subtle spiritual practices that existed alongside herbal remedies and observation-based rituals. The Church, a silent yet constant presence, influenced both the understanding of conception and the morality of behavior surrounding it. Sexual activity was regulated by social and religious norms, often guided by the rhythms of the moon and the counsel of priests and midwives. The blending of faith and practical knowledge created an intricate lattice of guidance, in which the boundaries between body, mind, and spirit were porous, fluid, and deeply interconnected. Astrology played a similarly crucial role. The alignment of planets, the rising and setting of certain stars, and the phases of the moon were considered essential to understanding fertility. Women and midwives alike would consult charts, either memorized or recorded on parchment, noting when the moon was waxing or waning, when particular constellations held sway over conception. There was a deep reverence for the belief that the universe itself communicated through these signs, offering subtle guidance for those patient and attentive enough to interpret them. Within her small room, the woman continued her private observations. A bowl of water sat on the table, reflecting the moonlight like a still pool. In it, she might drop seeds or grains, observing their reaction to her touch or to the warmth of her hand. These experiments, seemingly simple or peculiar to a modern eye, were infused with layers of meaning, symbolic, empirical, and spiritual. Each movement was deliberate, a ritualized conversation with her own body and with the greater cosmos. In another house nearby, an apprentice midwife carefully arranged an assortment of dried herbs: rue to ward off misfortune, fennel to encourage vitality, rosemary for clarity of mind, and sage to balance humors. Each herb carried a history, a story, and a subtle power, or so it was believed. She ground them into fine powders, mixed them with water or wine, and prepared poultices or teas. Every step was taken with reverence, her movements slow and measured, as if the precision itself amplified the efficacy of her craft. The interplay between observation and ritual was delicate and meticulous. When examining urine, the midwife observed color, clarity, consistency, and even scent, translating these subtle indicators into predictions. Seeds might be placed in the liquid, and their growth or decay was read as a sign. Sometimes, charms or small talismans were included in the experiment, an act that merged superstition with practical inquiry, blending the seen and unseen into one coherent practice. In the surrounding village, communal memory played a crucial role. Women spoke in hushed tones of the signs they had observed in themselves or in others. A particular change in appetite, an unusual dream, a fleeting sensation in the womb. Each was recorded mentally and shared carefully. These stories were interwoven into the collective wisdom, shaping practices that were as empirical as they were mystical. They formed an invisible map of understanding, an intricate network of knowledge passed orally from one generation to the next. Some methods might seem uncanny to the modern mind. Drinking water infused with specific herbs, sleeping with certain objects beneath one's pillow, or consulting the alignment of stars were all attempts to bridge the gap between the mysterious processes of the body and the observable world. Yet these were grounded in observation. Patterns emerged over time, and the women who practiced these rituals developed an impressive intuition, combining sensory perception, pattern recognition, and spiritual guidance into a unified form of knowledge. Even social observation played a role. A midwife might watch a woman's gait, noting shifts in posture or subtle tremors in her hands. The tone of her voice, the texture of her skin, and the brightness of her eyes were all pieces of a puzzle. Every element was part of a language, a system of signs that required careful attention and patience. This embodied intelligence, though rarely recorded in writing, represented a sophisticated understanding of human physiology filtered through the lens of cultural belief and lived experience. In some households, practices were intertwined with moral and spiritual considerations. Women would pray for fertility not only for their own sake, but for the prosperity and continuity of the family and community. The ability to conceive was seen as both a blessing and a responsibility, linking the individual intimately to the welfare of the broader social network. Rituals performed in secret, whispered prayers, and acts of devotion created a subtle rhythm of expectation, one that shaped behavior, emotion, and attention in profound ways. Beyond the personal and spiritual practices, there were layers of observation based on the natural world. The behavior of animals, the growth patterns of plants, even the timing of seasonal changes were interpreted as indicators. Birds nesting near the home might be seen as a favorable sign. A sudden frost or unseasonable wind might be taken as a warning. These observations, coupled with attentiveness to the body, formed a holistic system in which humans, animals, and the cosmos were interconnected. Through these practices, women cultivated not only the hope of new life, but a deep resilience. Each ritual, each observation, each whispered story provided a framework for understanding uncertainty. The fragility of life and the inevitability of loss were balanced by patience, attentiveness, and a profound sense of connection to family, to community, and to the unseen forces that were believed to shape existence itself. As the moon climbed higher, casting a pale glow upon the village, the woman returned to her nightly observances. She recorded details in her mind, the faint stir of her abdomen, the warmth of her body, the slightest changes in mood or appetite. She reflected on the day's subtle interactions, on the lessons she had learned, and on the whispers of guidance carried from generations of women who had come before her. In this quiet reflection, she found both knowledge and solace, a profound sense of continuity that bridged centuries. Her attention was both outward and inward. She noticed the soft shift of shadows in her room, the faint scratching of a mouse along the floorboards, and the distant toll of the church bell marking midnight. Each sound, each movement, became part of the tapestry of her awareness, woven together with the physical and spiritual signs she had been observing. In this way, the external world became a companion in her quiet act of listening, a partner in the dialogue between body, mind, and unseen forces. The night wore on, and still she observed, reflected, and whispered prayers under her breath. Sometimes she spoke aloud, sometimes in her thoughts alone, invoking saints, celestial bodies, and the unseen currents of life. Each whisper, each attentive act, was a testament to a knowledge that was both practical and mystical, scientific in its observation, spiritual in its intent. By the time the first hint of dawn softened the horizon, she felt a quiet equilibrium within herself. The body, the spirit, the environment, and the legacy of those who had come before her had converged in an intricate, almost imperceptible harmony. She understood in ways both subtle and profound that life itself could be anticipated, nurtured, and understood not through certainty, but through patience, attentiveness, and reverent observation. And so, as the pale light of morning stretched across the village once more, the rhythms of life continued, quiet, deliberate, and profoundly human. The women of the village, bound by generations of whispered knowledge, ritual, and observation, carried forward the subtle, intimate understanding of conception, fertility, and the body. Their wisdom, though largely hidden from history's written records, lived on in their quiet attentiveness, in the careful observation of signs, and in the patient, loving attention they gave to life in all its fragile, wondrous complexity. As the village slowly adjusted to the muted light of early morning, a sense of calm lingered in the air, woven into the very walls of the timbered homes, the narrow streets, and the gardens where herbs grew in carefully tended patches. Life proceeded at a measured pace, the rhythm of existence synchronized with the cycles of nature, the phases of the moon, and the subtle currents of human anticipation. For the women of the village, the day was not merely a passage of hours. It was a continuation of the delicate dialogue with the unseen, a ritual of listening, observing, and responding to the signs that whispered of life and possibility. The woman, rising from her bed of straw-stuffed linen, stretched slowly, feeling the subtle tension and release in her muscles, the gentle pulse of blood through her body, and the quiet stirrings deep within her abdomen. Her hands brushed over the curve of her belly with soft attentiveness, her fingers tracing patterns of awareness she had learned over countless nights of quiet reflection. She had come to understand that her body spoke in the most delicate of languages, and that to misinterpret or ignore these whispers was to risk losing connection with the rhythms of fertility, health, and life itself. Her morning routine, though seemingly ordinary, was layered with significance. She drew water from the well, mindful of its temperature, clarity, and the faint resonance of its movement as it filled her bucket. She arranged small bundles of herbs along the windowsill, their dried leaves faintly fragrant, each chosen for its symbolic, spiritual, or physiological properties. Rue for protection, fennel for vitality, chamomile for calm, sage for balance. These plants were not merely remedies but extensions of understanding, bridges between the body and the larger cosmos. As she prepared her modest breakfast, she reflected upon the practices and rituals that had guided women for generations. The observation of the body, the interpretation of dreams, the alignment with lunar cycles and celestial events, the whispered prayers and blessings, the careful preparation of herbal infusions, all were interwoven into a single tapestry of care, attentiveness, and hope. Each act, though simple in appearance, carried profound meaning, embodying knowledge that had been honed over centuries of lived experience. Across the village, other women engaged in parallel practices, their actions harmonizing with the rhythms of their own bodies and those of the world around them. Some placed small vessels of water or soil on windowsills to catch the first rays of dawn, believing that the growth or stagnation of seeds or grains within them could offer insight into conception. Others prepared poultices, balms, or teas, carefully noting the responses of their bodies and recording subtle shifts in sensation, mood, or appetite. The midwife, whose knowledge was both revered and feared, moved quietly between households, observing, advising, and gently guiding. Her expertise was as much spiritual as it was physical, informed by long experience, careful observation, and a deeply rooted understanding of the interplay between body, environment, and unseen forces. She interpreted signs not in isolation, but as part of a holistic network of knowledge. The color of urine, the texture of the skin, the temperature of the hands, the cadence of the voice, and the dreams that visited women in the night. Each detail was a thread in a complex web of understanding, requiring patience, attention, and intuition to weave into meaningful guidance. In certain households, astrology played a particularly central role. Charts, either memorized or recorded on parchment, guided women and midwives alike in determining the most auspicious times for conception, rest, and ritual. The waxing and waning of the moon, the rising of particular constellations, and the movement of planets were believed to exert subtle influence over the body, dictating not only fertility, but the overall well-being of women. Aligning actions with these cosmic rhythms was a practice rooted in both observation and belief, a recognition that life and the universe were inextricably entwined. Yet, for all the mystical and spiritual dimensions, there remained an empirical core. Observations were repeated, compared, and refined over time. A woman might note that after certain preparations, dreams, or rituals, subtle changes in the body occurred with greater consistency. These observations were not dismissed as superstition. They were interpreted as valuable information, a form of early empirical knowledge filtered through the lens of cultural belief. In this way, medieval women developed a sophisticated understanding of their bodies, their cycles, and the interplay between internal and external forces, even without the tools of modern science. The process was slow, deliberate, and intimate. It required attentiveness to the minutiae of experience, the taste of water, the sensation of warmth in the morning sun, the timing of bowel movements, the patterns of menstruation, the pulse of life within the womb. Every detail could carry significance, a clue in the ongoing dialogue between body, spirit, and the surrounding world. This attentiveness was not anxiety-driven, but rooted in care, patience, and a deep respect for the forces that governed life and fertility. At midday, the woman might visit the garden or courtyard to collect fresh herbs, noting the subtle changes in their growth, color, and scent. Such observations were interpreted symbolically as well as practically. The vitality of a plant mirrored the health and potential fertility of the body. Wilting, discoloration, or stagnation suggested the need for adjustment in diet, ritual, or care. Even the positioning of plants, the direction of sunlight, and the flow of air were considered integral to the efficacy of these practices. Within this framework, dreams continued to hold profound significance. Women were taught to recall and interpret the visions that emerged during sleep, believing that they conveyed guidance from unseen forces, ancestors, or divine entities. Dreams of water, birds, or unusual phenomena were considered rich in symbolic meaning, and their careful interpretation formed an essential component of the broader understanding of conception and pregnancy. The communal dimension of knowledge was equally important. Women shared their experiences quietly, in kitchens, by the fire, or in the shade of a tree. Observations, dreams, and outcomes were discussed in hushed tones, creating a shared body of knowledge that transcended individual experience. This oral tradition ensured the preservation and refinement of practices across generations, linking women through a network of observation, reflection, and wisdom. Even seemingly mundane daily actions were imbued with ritual significance. The act of washing, dressing, or preparing food was performed with mindful attention, acknowledging the interplay of physical, spiritual, and environmental factors. The alignment of daily activity with observation and ritual created a rhythm that supported the cultivation of fertility, the maintenance of health, and the nurturing of hope. By late afternoon, the woman would revisit the various signs she had monitored, subtle sensations in her body, the growth or lack thereof of seeds, the results of herbal preparations, and the reflections from dreams and observations. Each was carefully considered, forming a mosaic of information that guided her understanding and decisions. She moved between patience, hope, and quiet contemplation, aware that certainty was often elusive, yet confident in the reliability of attentive observation. As evening approached, she prepared for the night with deliberate care. Her environment was arranged to support quiet reflection and rest. Herbs near her bed, candles or lamps positioned to cast gentle light, water or soil prepared for observation, and objects of devotion placed where they could offer reassurance and protection. Each act was both practical and symbolic, a reaffirmation of her role as participant in the ongoing dialogue between body, spirit, and the unseen forces of life. Night fell, enveloping the village in stillness and shadow. In the quiet hours, the woman lay on her straw-filled mattress, listening to the subtle rhythms of her body, the distant sounds of the sleeping village, and the faint murmurs of the natural world beyond her home. The moonlight, softened by the gentle drifting of clouds, illuminated the room, casting shifting patterns across walls and floor. She allowed herself to drift into reflection, meditation, and sleep, knowing that through attention, care, and patience, she was part of an enduring continuum of wisdom that connected generations of women. Her consciousness, though quiet, remained attentive to the signs of life within her, to the subtle messages carried by the body, and to the patterns of the surrounding world. This attentiveness was a form of deep knowledge, both empirical and mystical, a testament to the ingenuity, resilience, and intuition of women who had lived long before the advent of modern science. And as the night deepened, and the world outside settled into stillness, she experienced a profound sense of continuity. The wisdom of midwives, the guidance of elders, the interpretations of signs and dreams, the alignment with celestial and terrestrial rhythms, all merged into a single, seamless understanding. She was, in that moment, fully present within the great flow of life, connected to those who had come before, and quietly preparing to receive whatever signals the body, the cosmos, and the unseen forces might offer in the coming days. As the first whispers of dawn brushed the village rooftops with pale gold, the quiet attentiveness of the night slowly gave way to the subtle stirrings of a new day. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-damp earth and smoke from lingering embers of hearth fires that had burned through the night. In the soft light, shadows of trees stretched across narrow lanes, creating patterns that seemed to move and shift as though alive, echoing the gentle rhythms of the lives unfolding beneath them. Within the homes, women began to rise, their motions deliberate, measured, and intimately attuned to the delicate dialogue between body, environment, and unseen forces that had guided them through countless nights before. The woman from the previous scenes, now seated near her window with the pale light falling across her face, traced the outlines of small objects on her table, a bowl of water, several seeds, and a handful of dried herbs whose fragrances mingled softly in the morning air. Her hands rested lightly upon her belly, feeling once more for subtle stirrings, gentle rhythms, and quiet signals that spoke of life's presence within her. She reflected on the rituals and observations she had maintained for generations, not as acts of superstition, but as practices steeped in careful attention, experience, and patient observation. In medieval life, pregnancy was both a profound mystery and a tangible reality. Without the tools of modern science, women relied on the methods passed down by mothers, grandmothers, and midwives, each technique a blend of ritual, observation, and symbolic reasoning. The famous barley and wheat test remained a cornerstone in many households. Seeds soaked in a woman's urine over several nights were carefully observed for sprouting. Growth suggested conception. Stagnation suggested otherwise. While modern science interprets this as coincidental hormonal influence on seed germination, for medieval women, it was a tangible conversation with the body, a way to make the invisible visible, a bridge between uncertainty and knowledge. Yet the tests did not end there. Garlic, placed carefully near or under the pillow, was believed to reveal the openness of the womb. If the scent of garlic reached the breath, the womb was thought to be open and unoccupied. If the scent did not permeate, life was believed to have taken root. This practice, while peculiar to modern eyes, illustrates a subtle understanding of the body's internal states, interpreted symbolically through everyday objects. Such rituals allowed women to externalize the complex biological processes they could not otherwise observe. Dreams continued to serve as guidance. The interpretation of nocturnal visions was central to medieval women's understanding of conception. Dreams of running water might symbolize fertility. A bird alighting on a windowsill could be a sign of impending pregnancy. Women recorded these visions mentally, or in rare cases, on parchment hidden within their chambers. Dreams were treated not as mere imagination, but as meaningful signals, providing insight into the body and its unseen movements. Astrology, too, remained intimately connected to these practices. The alignment of planets, the phases of the moon, and the position of constellations were carefully noted, often by the midwife herself, who held a dual role as both spiritual guide and empirical observer. Certain days were considered more auspicious for conception, while others were avoided. These practices were not solely superstition. They represented a structured framework within which women could interpret the rhythms of their bodies and the cycles of the natural world. Herbs continued to play a vital role. Rue, sage, rosemary, chamomile, and fennel were not simply remedies. They were extensions of attentiveness. A poultice applied to the body, an infusion sipped with intention, or a dried plant kept near the bed were acts that integrated observation with symbolic reasoning. Each herb carried a tradition of efficacy, distilled from generations of experience, forming a complex vocabulary of health, fertility, and spiritual protection. Beyond herbs and seeds, rituals often involved small objects of devotion. Amulets, charms, and tokens blessed in chapels were placed carefully near the body, under pillows or beside beds. Women whispered prayers to saints, such as Saint Anne, invoking protection for themselves and the life they hoped to nurture. The interplay of tangible objects, spiritual appeal, and empirical observation created a network of practices that were deeply immersive, requiring the body and mind to be simultaneously attentive, patient, and reverent. Observation extended to subtle patterns of daily life. Appetite, mood, strength, sleep, and response to sensory stimuli were all noted with care. A sudden craving for a particular food, a new aversion, or a heightened sensitivity to odors were interpreted as messages from the womb. Midwives, possessing keen experience, would assist in interpreting these signs, their expertise refined over decades of attentive practice. Community played a crucial role in these practices. While the rituals themselves were often private, the knowledge surrounding them was shared quietly among women. Stories of success, failure, and subtle insight were exchanged in kitchens, near hearth fires, and during communal tasks. Through these interactions, collective wisdom was maintained and transmitted, ensuring that each generation could build upon the observations and rituals of those who had come before. Yet, amidst the quiet attentiveness, there remained profound uncertainty. Pregnancy was both a blessing and a risk. Miscarriages and infant mortality were common, and every pregnancy was a delicate negotiation with forces beyond human control. The rituals, tests, and prayers did not guarantee outcome, but they provided structure, reassurance, and a sense of agency. The women of this era learned to balance hope with caution, to nurture their expectations gently, and to approach the mysteries of life with both reverence and patience. As midday approached, the woman prepared her daily observations. She poured water into a small bowl, noting its clarity and temperature, and arranged seeds for a new test, watching closely as they absorbed moisture and began to respond. She observed her own body in tandem, the gentle swelling of her abdomen, the warmth of her skin, the fluttering within that suggested life was stirring. She combined these physical signals with her spiritual practices, whispering prayers and offering small thanks to saints and celestial bodies alike. Each action was part of a continuum, linking body, spirit, and cosmos in a single attentive rhythm. Even the surrounding environment contributed to understanding. The behavior of animals, the growth of plants, and the subtle movements of the wind were carefully noted. A bird nesting near the home was interpreted as favorable, a sudden frost or unseasonable wind as a caution. These observations formed a holistic system of meaning, in which natural, human, and spiritual elements were inseparable. By late afternoon, she reflected upon all that had been observed. Every subtle sensation, every sprouting seed, every dream and omen had been recorded in her mind, forming a mosaic of knowledge that informed her expectations, guided her care, and connected her with the wisdom of countless generations. In these quiet reflections, she experienced a profound intimacy with life itself, a recognition of the fragility, wonder, and continuity of human existence. Nightfall arrived once more, bringing with it the hush of the village and the gentle rhythms of nocturnal life. The woman arranged her chamber carefully, positioning herbs, amulets, and containers for observation. Candles flickered softly, casting shadows across walls that seemed to dance in harmony with the rhythms of her own body. She lay down on her straw-filled mattress, her hands resting lightly upon her abdomen, attuned to the faintest signals of movement and warmth. Sleep came gradually, accompanied by quiet reflection on the practices, observations, and rituals that had guided her through generations. The continuity of knowledge, the interplay of faith, observation, and attentiveness, and the patient dialogue with the unseen forces of life created a deep sense of connection. She drifted into dreams, carrying with her the cumulative wisdom of women who had come before, and the enduring hope of life that would continue through generations to come. The moonlight bathed the room in silver tranquility. Outside, the village rested beneath the soft embrace of night. Within the home, the woman's quiet vigilance intertwined with dreams and whispers, prayers and observations, forming a seamless flow of knowledge, hope, and intimate understanding. In this manner, life, fragile, mysterious, and profound, continued its rhythm, sustained by patient attentiveness and the enduring wisdom of countless generations of women who had learned to listen, to observe, and to care. The village lay wrapped in a soft pre-dawn hush, the faint outlines of cottages and thatched roofs barely distinguishable beneath the mist that lingered over the earth. Every breath of wind, every rustle of leaves seemed magnified in the stillness, carrying with it the subtle, almost imperceptible signals of life waking slowly. Inside her small chamber, the woman stirred slightly, stretching her limbs and placing her hands lightly upon her abdomen, feeling for the gentle movements and rhythms she had learned to read so carefully. The night's dreams lingered in her mind, images of flowing water, swaying trees, and hovering birds blending with faint recollections of whispered prayers and the soft cadence of the midwife's instructions. The rituals, tests, and attentiveness she had maintained over countless nights now converged into a single, continuous awareness. She observed the seeds laid out before her the previous evening. Barley and wheat had swelled slightly in the water, their tiny shoots beginning to show the faintest signs of growth. In the language she had learned through generations, this was a hopeful indication. She did not exclaim with certainty, but allowed herself a quiet nod of recognition, acknowledging that life, however delicate, might already be asserting itself within her. Her attention moved seamlessly between her body, the objects before her, and the world outside. The wind shifted gently, carrying scents of earth, herbs, and smoke from distant hearths. A bird's song reached her ears through the thin wooden window, its melody a subtle marker of the changing day. She was acutely aware that these natural rhythms were not mere coincidence, but part of the intricate fabric that connected her own cycles, the patterns of the environment, and the guidance of unseen forces. Midwives, who served as both guides and custodians of knowledge, often emphasized the importance of patience and attentiveness in reading these signs. A twitch of the abdomen, a sudden warmth, or the smallest change in mood could all be significant indicators. In some cases, midwives interpreted the behavior of animals near the home or the way sunlight struck objects as potential omens. The interplay between observation, symbolic interpretation, and ritual action formed a sophisticated, holistic understanding of fertility, far more nuanced than mere superstition. Within the walls of her home, the woman prepared an herbal infusion, carefully selecting each dried plant for its traditional properties. Rue for protection and blessing, chamomile for calm and balance, fennel for vitality and digestive harmony, sage for grounding the humors. She ground the leaves gently between her palms, inhaling their faint fragrance and feeling the subtle warmth of the plant life. These acts, though simple in appearance, were deeply significant, creating a bridge between the tangible world of herbs and the intangible rhythms of the body and spirit. The interpretation of dreams had not ceased with nightfall. In the half-light of dawn, she recalled the vivid images that had filled her mind. A flowing stream curving between stones, a small bird alighting on a windowsill, and the sensation of rising warmth that had accompanied them. Each dream was carefully examined and mentally catalogued, compared to the results of physical tests and the subtle movements of her body. Dreams were never dismissed, but treated as an integral component of knowledge, a form of insight that connected the inner life to the external world and the divine. Her attention also extended to the community. Women in neighboring homes were performing similar rituals, quietly observing, recording in memory, and sharing experiences in subtle, hushed ways. Knowledge was communal, passed through oral tradition and daily example. A young girl learning from her mother, a midwife instructing an apprentice, the quiet conversation over a fire. All these interactions maintained the continuum of observation and insight, ensuring that each generation refined and preserved the practices of those who came before. By mid-morning, she had set her observations aside temporarily to tend to practical needs. Water was drawn from the well, bread prepared, and herbs arranged for future use. Even these mundane tasks were infused with attentiveness. The temperature of the water, the texture of the dough, and the vitality of the plants were all subtly observed, recorded in memory, and considered for their possible influence on fertility and well-being. This meticulous awareness turned ordinary labor into a ritualized engagement with life, a continuous practice of mindfulness and attentiveness. As the day progressed, she revisited the seeds and herbs. Slight changes in color or growth were carefully noted, and the results were cross-referenced with physical sensations and dreams. She reflected on the alignment of the moon, the position of stars at night, and the guidance of saints invoked in prayer. The integration of celestial, terrestrial, and bodily cues formed a sophisticated framework for understanding conception and early pregnancy. This framework was deeply practical as well as symbolic, guiding dietary choices, timing of activity, and the management of emotional and spiritual states. The social dimension remained significant. Even in her solitude, the knowledge she engaged with was shaped by the collective wisdom of the women around her. A midwife might visit to verify observations, offer guidance, or provide reassurance. Neighbors exchanged quiet confidences about dreams, rituals, or unusual sensations, each piece of information contributing to a shared understanding of the body, fertility, and the hidden processes that governed life. This communal awareness created both a support network and a means of verification, allowing individual experience to be cross-referenced against generations of accumulated knowledge. By late afternoon, the woman reflected on the continuity of these practices. The interplay between body, environment, ritual, and divine guidance created a complex, holistic understanding that encompassed physical, emotional, spiritual, and communal dimensions. Every sensation was meaningful, every object symbolic, and every interaction with the natural and human world potentially significant. Fertility was not a single event, but a sustained engagement with life, requiring attentiveness, patience, and reverence at every moment. Evening approached, and with it the return of quiet attentiveness. The woman arranged her space carefully, ensuring that herbs, seeds, and small charms were positioned for observation. Candles flickered, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move in rhythm with her own breathing. She placed her hands lightly upon her abdomen, feeling the soft movements and warmth that had become her constant companions. The subtle rise and fall of her body, combined with the faint shifts in sensation and emotional state, provided an intimate map of the hidden processes within her. Sleep approached gradually, accompanied by gentle reflection. The knowledge she carried, empirical, mystical, and social, guided her understanding, shaped her expectations, and provided both comfort and agency in the face of uncertainty. She whispered prayers to saints and ancestors, recalling the dreams and omens of previous nights and allowing these images to mingle with the awareness of her own body. Each breath, each sensation, each thought became part of a seamless continuum of attentiveness, a tapestry woven across generations of women who had learned to listen to the quiet, subtle language of life. The moon, now high in the sky, cast a silver glow across the village. The streets were empty, and the houses were silent save for the occasional creak of timber or rustle of wind through the trees. Within her chamber, the woman rested fully, her mind and body aligned in an intricate dialogue with unseen forces. The subtle messages from her body, the patterns of nature, and the guidance of ancestral knowledge converged in quiet harmony. She drifted toward sleep, carrying with her the deep sense of continuity and intimacy that defined the lived experience of women across centuries. A delicate understanding that life, though mysterious, could be observed, interpreted, and honored through patience, attentiveness, and ritual. Outside, the village breathed slowly, enveloped in the soft rhythm of night and the faint anticipation of dawn. Inside, the practices of women continued to unfold, quietly, persistently, and profoundly, bridging the realms of the physical, spiritual, and natural worlds. Each whispered observation, each carefully performed ritual, and each silent reflection contributed to a continuum of knowledge and care that transcended the limitations of written record. In this quiet, attentive space, life, fragile, intricate, and wondrous, was observed, honored, and nurtured, echoing through generations in ways both subtle and profound. The village had settled into the deep, quiet hours of night, when even the faintest sounds carried far across empty streets and fields. The wind moved softly through the trees, bending branches in a gentle rhythm, and the faint murmur of distant animals provided a subtle background to the stillness. Inside her small chamber, the woman sat beside her modest table, her hands resting lightly on her abdomen, attuned to the soft movements and rhythms that had become the intimate language of her body. She inhaled slowly, letting the scent of dried herbs, faint smoke from a dying ember, and the earthy aroma of her surroundings fill her senses, grounding her in the moment while connecting her to generations of women who had performed the same attentive rituals. The practices she followed were a blend of observation, ritual, and intuition, cultivated over lifetimes of experience. Seeds placed in water, herbal infusions consumed or applied, prayers whispered to saints. Each action carried meaning, both symbolic and practical. Observing the growth of barley and wheat in water was not merely superstition. It was a careful translation of subtle bodily cues into observable phenomena. The smallest movement of a seedling became a reflection of life beginning within her, a tangible indicator of the unseen changes her body was experiencing. Dreams held a particularly powerful role in this continuum of knowledge. The night before, she had dreamed of a winding river, its surface glittering with moonlight, and of a small bird landing delicately on the branch of a nearby tree. In the interpretive language passed down from mothers to daughters, this suggested the stirring of life, the gentle emergence of a new presence within the womb. Such dreams were not considered whimsical. They were part of a sophisticated system of pattern recognition, intuition, and spiritual reflection, integrated seamlessly with empirical observation of the body and environment. Astrological awareness intertwined with these practices. The alignment of the moon, the positions of certain stars, and the perceived influence of planets were woven into the framework of understanding fertility. Certain days were believed to be auspicious for conception or for performing specific rituals, while others were to be avoided. These alignments, observed and recorded by midwives and learned women, created a celestial rhythm that paralleled the cycles of the body, the seasons, and the natural world. Herbs remained a constant, tactile connection to both the material and spiritual worlds. Rue, sage, chamomile, rosemary, and fennel were prepared with intention, ground carefully between her palms, inhaled for their aroma, and applied or consumed with mindfulness. Each herb carried a story, a history of use, and a symbolic resonance. Their presence in her chamber was more than medicinal. It was an extension of her attentiveness, a physical manifestation of knowledge accumulated across generations. Community played a subtle but indispensable role. Even in her isolation, the knowledge she relied upon was communal. Advice and observations shared by neighbors, midwives, and elder women formed an unbroken chain of understanding. Hushed conversations over the fire, quiet counsel during routine visits, and the subtle exchange of experience in domestic spaces ensured that knowledge of fertility, observation, and ritual was preserved and transmitted. This oral tradition allowed for the refinement of practices over time, incorporating both successes and failures into a collective intelligence that guided each woman in her personal and bodily attentiveness. The integration of observation, ritual, and spiritual engagement required intense patience. The woman noted even minor variations in her physical state, subtle swelling, fleeting warmth, or slight changes in appetite. These signs were cross-referenced with dreams, herbal experiments, and environmental cues. A slight twitch of the abdomen could be as meaningful as the outcome of a barley test. A new aversion to certain foods might indicate subtle hormonal shifts. The precision with which these signals were interpreted reflected centuries of accumulated experience and deep cultural understanding. As afternoon light faded into the muted gold of evening, she returned to her observation of seeds, herbs, and bodily signals. Slight changes in the color of the water, the growth of sprouts, and the aroma of herbal infusions were all noted, forming a mosaic of information. Each small detail was interpreted within a system that integrated body, spirit, and environment. In these quiet moments, the woman experienced a profound sense of connection to the natural world and to the lineage of women whose wisdom had shaped her understanding. Religious devotion intertwined seamlessly with practical attentiveness. Candles burned softly, small charms placed with care, and prayers whispered to saints formed a framework of spiritual alignment. Saints associated with fertility, protection, and the guidance of life were invoked with both reverence and quiet familiarity. The spiritual practices reinforced attentiveness, providing a lens through which the ordinary and extraordinary, the seen and unseen, could be interpreted and understood. The uncertainty inherent in the process of pregnancy was acknowledged and embraced. Women understood that even the most careful observation and ritual could not guarantee outcomes. Miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant mortality were frequent, reminders of the fragility of life. Yet the practices provided structure, reassurance, and agency, a means of navigating uncertainty with dignity, patience, and attentiveness. Even the environment offered subtle cues. The behavior of animals, patterns of plant growth, shifts in the wind, and changes in sunlight were all interpreted as potential indicators. Birds nesting nearby or unusual movements in household animals were considered messages of hope or caution. The natural world was seen as a partner in observation, a mirror of the rhythms and states of human life. As dusk fell, she arranged her space for nighttime observation. Herbs were placed near the bed, seeds were monitored in water, and small amulets or charms were positioned with care. Candles flickered softly, casting long shadows that seemed to sway in rhythm with her breathing. She rested her hands lightly upon her abdomen, aware of the gentle stirrings within, and allowed her mind to drift between observation, reflection, and prayer. Sleep came gradually, carrying with it dreams and visions that offered further insight. The winding river, the small bird, the subtle flutter within, all formed part of a continuous narrative of observation, interpretation, and understanding. Each night's experience, whether dream, test, or subtle bodily signal, became a thread in the intricate tapestry of knowledge, linking her to generations of women who had performed the same attentive practices. The moonlight poured softly into the chamber, illuminating her space with silver tranquility. Every object, from seeds to herbs to charms, contributed to a holistic system of understanding. Attentiveness to the body, spiritual observance, and interpretation of subtle cues from the environment created a rhythm of life that was at once intimate, mystical, and profoundly practical. Outside, the village rested in quiet harmony with the night. The wind, the trees, the distant sounds of animals, all became part of the fabric of attentiveness that the women of the village relied upon. Knowledge was preserved not in written texts, but in memory, practice, and observation, passed silently through generations. Each act, each ritual, each observation formed an invisible thread connecting women across time, embedding understanding within the very fabric of daily life. In the deepest hours before dawn, the woman reflected on her own place within this lineage. She acknowledged the delicate interplay of body, spirit, environment, and social wisdom that guided her understanding of fertility and pregnancy. Through careful attention, patient observation, and quiet ritual, she participated in a living continuum of knowledge, a dialogue that transcended individual experience and connected her to generations of women whose attentive care had shaped the rhythms of life itself. The night stretched on, silent and patient. She drifted slowly toward sleep, carrying with her the combined awareness of dreams, observations, spiritual alignment, and ancestral wisdom. The continuity of practice, The intricate interpretation of signs and the quiet, profound attentiveness she maintained ensured that life, delicate, mysterious and wondrous, could be observed, honored and nurtured. The rhythms of the village, the body, and the cosmos intertwined, forming a seamless harmony that reflected the deep intelligence and resilience of women who had learned to listen, interpret, and care across centuries. The night had deepened once more over the village, the stars scattered like scattered grains of silver across the velvet sky. Their faint light filtered through the thin haze of clouds drifting lazily above. The air was cool and fragrant with the subtle scents of earth, herbs, and smoke from dying embers in the chimneys of neighboring homes. Within her chamber, the woman sat quietly by her table, her hands resting lightly upon her abdomen, attuned to the gentle stirrings that she had learned to recognize as the language of her own body. The faint rustle of leaves and the soft nocturnal calls of distant animals blended seamlessly into her quiet consciousness, a reminder that she was not alone, but part of a vast, interconnected world where every motion, every sound, and every sensation had meaning. Her attention, cultivated over years of patient observation, moved with deliberate care across the small objects she had arranged. A bowl of water holding barley and wheat seeds, the dried herbs carefully sorted and aligned by their purpose, and small charms imbued with the prayers and blessings of saints invoked for protection and fertility. Each object was more than its physical form. Each carried significance, offering insight into processes both internal and external, visible and invisible. The seeds, for instance, swelled subtly, their tiny shoots bending toward the light that filtered through the window. This small, quiet sign was interpreted as a reflection of life stirring within her womb, a tangible affirmation of the complex dialogue she maintained between body, mind, and the natural and spiritual worlds. Medieval practices of fertility and pregnancy were grounded not solely in superstition, but in a sophisticated understanding of observation, pattern recognition, and symbolic reasoning. Dreams played a central role in this system. The woman recalled the dream she had the previous night: a river winding through silvered fields, a small bird alighting delicately upon a branch, and a soft, rising warmth within herself. To her, each element was meaningful, a subtle signal to be interpreted in conjunction with physical sensations, the results of seed tests, and the alignment of celestial bodies. Dreams were not idle fantasies. They were active components of a living empirical system of understanding that merged the spiritual, the natural, and the bodily. Astrological observations, integrated seamlessly into these practices, guided the timing of actions and rituals. The moon's phases, the position of particular stars, and the influence of planets were all carefully recorded and considered. Certain days were deemed favorable for conception or for specific rituals, while others were approached with caution. The interplay between celestial patterns and bodily rhythms reflected a recognition that human life was part of a greater cosmic order, and that attentiveness to these patterns could offer insight and guidance. Herbs and natural substances continued to be central to her daily attentions. Rue, chamomile, fennel, sage, and rosemary were handled with care, their textures, aromas, and appearances observed with a level of attentiveness that transformed ordinary interaction into a form of sacred engagement. Some herbs were prepared as infusions, others as poultices or charms. Each preparation was undertaken with deliberate mindfulness, acknowledging both the practical and symbolic significance of the plants. In this way, the natural world became a collaborator in her understanding, a subtle guide in the ongoing process of observation, interpretation, and care. The midwife, whose knowledge spanned both generations and realms of spiritual and physical understanding, remained a central figure in this continuum. Her guidance was based on careful observation of signs and patterns, interpretation of dreams and omens, and the accumulated wisdom of countless women who had preceded her. A slight twitch of the abdomen, a fleeting change in color or temperature, or even the behavior of household animals could all be integrated into a comprehensive reading of fertility and early pregnancy. This integration of empirical observation with spiritual practice formed a nuanced, sophisticated system of knowledge, one that transcended mere superstition and provided both insight and comfort in an uncertain world. Community practices complemented these private rituals. Even in quiet moments, the shared knowledge of neighboring women, apprentices, and elders shaped her understanding and interpretations. Stories of dreams, subtle signs, and results of herbal tests were exchanged quietly, reinforcing a communal body of knowledge. The collective memory of the village ensured that practices were continually refined and validated across generations. It was through this shared attentiveness that women learned not only to understand their own bodies, but also to situate themselves within the broader rhythms of family, society, and the cosmos. The uncertainty of conception and pregnancy, ever present and deeply acknowledged, underscored the need for patience and careful observation. Even the most precise rituals and attentiveness could not guarantee outcomes. Miscarriages, infant mortality, and unforeseen complications were woven into the lived reality, creating a context in which hope, vigilance, and reverence for life were inseparable. In the midst of uncertainty, these practices provided structure, agency, and comfort, transforming anxiety into a deliberate, mindful engagement with the mysteries of existence. Environmental cues were observed with equal care. The behavior of birds and other animals, shifts in wind and weather, and changes in the growth of plants were interpreted as indicators of broader forces at work. A sudden frost or an unseasonable shift in the wind might be noted as cautionary, while a bird's nest near a window or the healthy growth of plants could signal favorability. These observations reinforce the intimate, continuous dialogue between the body, the natural world, and unseen spiritual forces. As the day transitioned to night, she prepared her chamber for evening observation. Candles were lit, casting gentle shadows across walls and objects arranged for attentiveness. Herbs were placed near the bed, the seeds monitored carefully, and small charms positioned with deliberate care. She rested her hands upon her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering movements that spoke of life beginning to take root within her. These quiet acts of attentiveness, sustained over hours and days, were both practical and symbolic, a meditation on care, life, and the subtle interconnections between the body, spirit, and environment. Sleep gradually enveloped her, bringing with it dreams that continued to guide understanding. The river of silvered water, the bird alighting upon a branch, and the warmth rising from within were all revisited, examined, and integrated into her awareness. Each night's experience, every subtle bodily sensation, every dream, every observation of seeds or herbs, became a thread in a tapestry of knowledge, connecting her to a lineage of women who had cultivated attentiveness and insight across generations. The moonlight poured through her window, illuminating the chamber with soft silver. Each shadow, each object, each subtle scent and sound became part of a living framework of understanding. Attentiveness to bodily rhythms, the careful interpretation of dreams and omens, and the integration of spiritual practice formed a continuous pattern, a way of inhabiting the body and the world that was both practical and profound. Beyond the private chamber, the village slept, yet its life was palpable. The soft rustle of leaves, the faint murmur of animals, and the subtle movements of distant humans all contributing to the sense of connection and interdependence. Knowledge of fertility, observation, and ritual was preserved not in texts, but in lived practice, observation, and shared experience. It was in this quiet attentiveness that life was sustained, honored and anticipated, bridging the seen and unseen, the tangible and symbolic. In the deepest hours before dawn, the woman reflected upon her place within this continuum. She recognized the interplay of body, environment, spiritual observance, and communal knowledge, understanding that each component contributed to a holistic awareness of life, fertility, and the unseen forces guiding existence. Through observation, ritual, and reverent attentiveness, she participated in a lineage of women whose wisdom, patience, and care had persisted across centuries. The night stretched on, enveloping her in quiet, contemplative space. She drifted towards sleep, with the awareness of her own body, the signs she had observed, the dreams she had interpreted, and the guidance of saints and ancestors. Life, fragile and wondrous, continued its subtle rhythm, interwoven with attentiveness, care, and continuity. Each whispered observation, each ritualized act, and each dream became a thread in a living tapestry, linking her to generations of women who had mastered the delicate art of listening to the body, the environment, and the unseen forces that shape existence. The first light of dawn crept gently over the village, softening the edges of rooftops, fields, and narrow lanes with a pale golden hue that seemed almost ethereal. The air was cool, carrying the faint fragrance of dew-kissed earth, smoldering embers, and the subtle aroma of herbs meticulously dried and arranged the night before. In her small chamber, the woman lay in quiet repose, her hands resting lightly upon the curve of her abdomen. She was enveloped in a profound stillness, a liminal space between night and day, consciousness and dream, the seen and the unseen. Here, in the hush of early morning, she reflected on the journey of attentiveness, ritual, and observation that had been her life's quiet companion. For countless nights, she had maintained an intimate dialogue with her body, interpreting the subtle signals and stirrings as messengers from the hidden life growing within. Every twitch, every flutter, every gentle warmth was a word in the language she had learned to speak with patient care. These messages were cross-referenced with dreams, herbal tests, seed growth, celestial alignment, and communal wisdom, a continuous tapestry of observation and insight that had been woven through generations. Each act, from grinding fennel to whispering prayers, was both practical and symbolic, a bridge connecting body, spirit, and the greater world. She recalled the dream she had the previous night, a stream of silvery water winding through an illuminated landscape, a small bird alighting delicately on a branch, and the gentle pulse of life she felt within herself. Dreams were never idle imaginings. They were part of an active, living framework of knowledge, offering guidance that intertwined with empirical observation and spiritual reflection. This integration of intuition and attentiveness had provided structure, insight, and reassurance, forming a guiding thread throughout her journey of conception and early pregnancy. As her awareness stretched across the stillness of the chamber, she noted the subtle shifts in her environment. The wind carried the faint sound of rustling leaves, birds began their tentative morning songs, and the distant cry of a rooster punctuated the gentle rhythm of village life. Each sound, each movement was observed, absorbed, and integrated into her ongoing attentiveness, a reminder that life existed not in isolation, but as part of a delicate, interconnected web. Even the smallest gestures of nature, a leaf drifting to the ground, a ripple in water, the soft rise and fall of the village, smoke, became part of a holistic system of signs that informed her understanding of life within and beyond her. The seeds she had placed in water the previous evening were inspected once more. Tiny shoots had begun to emerge, bending with quiet determination toward the faint morning light. The growth was subtle, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, yet profoundly significant to her. In the framework of medieval knowledge, the sprouting of barley and wheat in her observation bowl was more than a physical occurrence. It was a mirror of the life taking shape within her womb, a confirmation that the unseen processes she had nurtured through attentive ritual were indeed at work. Her hands moved gently to the bundle of dried herbs arranged beside her bed. Rue, chamomile, sage, fennel, rosemary, and small tokens of protection and blessing were handled with care, their textures, aromas, and symbolic meanings integrated into the ongoing rhythm of observation and ritual. Each herb was a dialogue in itself, a way of listening to the subtle currents of life, grounding the intangible and amplifying attentiveness through touch, smell, and preparation. The act of grinding, steeping, and arranging herbs was meditative, a deliberate choreography connecting the tangible with the spiritual, the material with the unseen. Throughout the day, she would repeat these observations and rituals, her awareness moving seamlessly between body, objects, environment, and dream. Even the smallest shifts in sensation, a fleeting warmth, a subtle tightening, a faint flutter, were noted, reflected upon, and interpreted. These were not mere physical phenomena. They were messages, insights, and confirmations in a system of knowledge honed over centuries. Every detail, no matter how minute, carried meaning. Dreams continued to guide her understanding, particularly those that recurred with variations of light, water, birds, or movement. The midwife had once described dreams as threads that could be read and woven together to anticipate and understand the processes of life. Through careful attention to these nightly visions, combined with the results of seed tests, herbal infusions, and subtle bodily observations, she maintained a sophisticated map of early conception and pregnancy. Dreams, like the movements of seeds, herbs, and celestial bodies, formed a cohesive language of signs and symbols, a language that required patience, intuition, and a quiet attentiveness to comprehend fully. Astrological awareness, though subtle, remained an ever-present guide. The moon's waxing and waning, the rise of particular stars, and the perceived influence of planets all informed timing, ritual, and expectation. These patterns were not deterministic, but they provided a framework within which action could be harmonized with the cycles of the cosmos. A day was considered auspicious not arbitrarily, but as part of an intricate correspondence between celestial rhythm, earthly practice, and the internal cycles of the body. Her reflection turned toward the communal dimension of these practices. Even in solitude, the knowledge she engaged with was collective. Advice, observations, and confirmations exchanged between women, midwives, and elders formed a network of wisdom, a whispered insight over a hearth fire, a subtle suggestion from a visiting midwife, a memory passed from mother to daughter, all contributed to an enduring, dynamic body of understanding. Knowledge was preserved in lived practice, observation, and attentiveness, not merely in texts. The uncertainty of life, ever present, framed these practices with humility and respect. Miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant mortality were not distant possibilities, but immediate realities of medieval life. Yet through attentiveness, ritual, and patient observation, the woman cultivated a sense of agency and reassurance. She understood that outcomes could never be fully controlled. But the act of caring, observing, interpreting, and performing ritual created a space of intentionality, connection, and resilience. Even the natural world was part of this dialogue. Birds nesting nearby, unusual animal behavior, and subtle changes in weather and wind were observed as messages and reflections. These signs were integrated into a broader understanding of life, fertility, and environmental harmony. The world itself, in its smallest and grandest manifestations, became both teacher and companion, guiding attentiveness and enriching understanding. As the day waned, she prepared her chamber for night. Candles flickered, shadows lengthened, and she arranged herbs, seeds, and charms for the nocturnal cycle of observation. Hands resting upon her abdomen, she attuned to the faintest movements, the softest rhythms, and the quiet pulse of life within her. These acts of care, performed repeatedly over days and nights, were meditative, grounding, and deeply intentional. They connected her physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially to a continuum of women who had walked this path before her. Sleep approached gradually, and with it, dreams returned. The river, the bird, the rising warmth, and the subtle interplay of light and movement. Each dream was read carefully, integrated into the map of observations, and reflected upon with reverence. The continuity of practice, observation, and attentiveness formed a seamless tapestry, weaving together body, spirit, and environment into a coherent, living framework of understanding. The moonlight poured softly into the chamber, illuminating walls, objects, and her own form with silver clarity. Each flickering shadow, each scent, each subtle sound became part of a living system, a continuous dialogue linking the tangible and intangible, the seen and unseen, the material and spiritual. The quiet attentiveness she maintained was a meditation on life itself, a practice of observation, interpretation, and reverence that had endured across centuries. She drifted into sleep fully immersed in this continuum, aware of the delicate rhythm of her body, the subtle signals from herbs, seeds, dreams, and the world outside. Life, fragile and wondrous, continue to unfold in a measured, quiet harmony, observed, honored, and nurtured through patience, attentiveness, and deep care. In this final scene, the tapestry of generations of women, their knowledge, intuition, rituals, and attentiveness converged into a singular, serene rhythm, a gentle lullaby of continuity, understanding, and quiet wonder. The village, too, lay in tranquil slumber, echoing the quiet rhythm of her body, the flow of life, and the continuity of generations. In the stillness, the unseen forces, dreams, signs, and rituals converged into a seamless harmony, reflecting the profound wisdom and resilience of women who had learned to read life, care for life, and honor life with gentle attentiveness. And as the night gave way to the soft promise of morning once more, the woman slept, fully present in the continuum of life, embraced by the subtle, enduring, and sacred rhythms that connected body, spirit, and cosmos, a perfect, tranquil closure to the cycle of attentiveness, knowledge, and quiet wonder.